Okay, so I'll introduce Justin while we're.
We want to get that on the video too.
It's too late. It's too late in the day. I'm just kidding. Are you going to give away prizes too, or do you already give away prizes?
The guy that was sitting here, he was the CEO. He was giving away.
Oh, okay. So he gets to give away the prizes.
Yeah, I was like, how come I don't get it?
Seriously, you should always save them for after the talk, right? Like,
That's bad marketing strategy.
Oh man.
Come on. What? Get it?
Should have been asking you for the trivia questions on WarGames.
That's why I threw that. Oh, go.
Oh, okay. All right. So, really quick. Justin, over the past 20 years, he's worked in a variety of places supporting educational nonprofit organizations, all the way to government, super secret squirrel, and Fortune Global 100 companies. This is the part that I like the best. In his spare time, Justin enjoys Piña Coladas, getting caught in the rain, and he's a Sagittarius. Please welcome Justin Hoeckle.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. You're all still here and maybe only partially buzzed, so I'll try to be a little quick on this. Originally, when I pinged and want to say thanks, but what are we going to talk about? Because we were supposed to get the speaker section right for being a sponsor, and they're like, well, you need to have a real talk. And I was like, oh, like I can't just tell you like what our company does. I'll have to come up with some things. So we took some more stories that we think are kind of interesting and some outcomes. I'm a big fan of WarGames, and I always like Joshua's kind of insights right on fundamentally what's going on. So that's where everything's tied into. I'm one of the owners, Trong and Chad back there, one of the owners of FIA. I won't say too much about it. We're a professional services consulting company, right? So we help companies and organizations really secure themselves, for lack of a better description. If you have more questions, you can come find us. We're not a staffing agency. A few people were saying that up front. I just want to make that clear. But we don't make products. We don't sell products. That's not really our gig. So first off, I want to thank everyone that's involved with BsidesRDU. I know it's not easy to put together an event like this. I've done some volunteering and assistance and speaking for the Portland PDX over in Oregon, B-Sides, where I live. And I know it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of effort to bring the community together. And really, FIA, our company, just started having folks here. We have about 10 strong, and we're growing. And so we really want to be part of the community too. So thank you guys. Thank you. I know Greg, Patrick, and Pavin were folks that I got to interact with, but I know there's a lot more of you out there. So thanks again, and keep supporting the community. There's going to be maybe 3-4 war stories, depending on how much time people want to give me, and I'll be available for questions, or we can have a beer afterwards and chat too. There's a fair amount of anonymity for the organizations involved, so I'll give kind of the lay of things that happened and what some of the takeaways that we have from it. So the first war story I'll call Uber espionage. At the time, it was a fairly novel approach that we had seen where a particular set of folks were targeted at the hotel that they were visiting at. So, a lot of times you have to put in, right, like over the Marriott there, what's your last name and what's your room, right? And only certain individuals of that set of folks that were traveling actually received kind of an extra special package. So not only was the Wi-Fi network of the hotel compromised, right, by the third party that was providing it, the people there were being directly targeted depending on who you were. And as soon as that person put in their information, right, and they needed to receive the internet, they were told they needed to update their system, right, for Adobe. The interesting thing is that it really was an Adobe update, and it was signed. It wasn't an Adobe certificate, but as far as Microsoft was concerned, it trusted it because it was a trusted certificate that had been stolen to sign. And it had some special additions, though, right, like a backdoor, a rat, a keylogger. So it was pretty interesting. Also, as soon as it had access, it began immediately establishing other foothold, persistence, enumerating the system and also what was around it, and collecting, or at least searching and then collecting anything that hit a specified file list in terms of keywords. So what happened, we detected and contained it within about 24 hours on this particular team. The reason we were really able to do that is typically when certain folks were traveling, we were on a little bit more of a high alert. We had a pretty good understanding of certain things that should be and not be on our network, especially around certain what we call high-value data sources and high-value data within those sources. So we pay a lot of attention, I know everyone wants, zero trust software-defined networks, but it's not really the reality. So the first place we go when we start working on things is at the network, like DNS, web traffic, email traffic. And looking at that, when we see abnormal user agent strings, a lot of times that's not matching what we normally see for what most folks use. It's either unauthorized software or it's something bad, like a piece of malware trying to look a certain way. So we fire an alarm off of that and have like a human being go look at that a bit more, right? And in this case, it was a legit problem, right? This malware calling back out and establishing its tunnel, and then encrypting it was not legit, right? And that's actually what kind of tipped us off in the first place that there might be a problem. So from that, we made phone calls, because at the time, actually, we didn't have pre-positioned tools on the systems to do like an incident response kind of, if you think of like Mirror or FireHX or Carbon Black or Incase or whatever thing you might use or leverage. The only thing we had at the time was it's now IBM Tivoli Endpoint, but Big Fix, so kind of like a precursor to Titanium and things of that nature. So we get some limited information. With folks, though, they were able to reach them and have kind of walk them through how to do, the guerrilla tactical incident response, collect this, do that. So we found a lot of the badness files, right, that we're talking out so that we could start to do analysis. And this was a fun one because within like 48 hours of constant, right, like we were going nonstop, we're able to figure out and decrypt with the decoder because we had the samples what that traffic looked like, because for us, for a while in the packet capture, it was just, encrypted traffic. Didn't mean a lot. But after we were able to decrypt, we could see what commands and sessions and files were going back and forth and what got enumerated and taken off the system. Also, using the intelligence gathered from the malware samples, the certificates used to sign, the callback domains, the whois data, and doing pivot analysis, we're able to pretty quickly build out a graph and associate data from like VirusTotal and other places, pretty likely affiliated, right, infrastructure related to like kind of bad.com that was being used. Other instances where malware might have been uploaded, right, that matched pretty closely to the signature and other TTPs or IOCs or whatever you want to call them, right, in terms of very close mapping, or just really whois data too, showing up with the same whois registrar. It's like, that's really interesting. You must be probably part of bad.com. And then bad 1, bad 2, bad 3 also starts to show up in other malware that's submitted, right, to different places. But we had initial triage and attribution of 72 hours. It's one of the few times, so I like to highlight it, that's actually the case. Usually, most places, it's days, weeks, months, years, which a couple of the other war stories, that was the case. But we were fortunate because we were able to be pre-deployed. And that gets into some of the Joshua insights. I've heard a few of the speakers today. This morning I was kind of absent, but in the afternoon talk about kind of being pre-positioned, and we certainly were, and we always focus on picking something. In this case, it was incident response and breach detection and containment were kind of the biggest concerns. So we focused deep on that data and tried to position as many tools at the time as we could. In particular with the network, we had to build kind of a platform, right, on open source with Bro and Snort, but then we used Splunk, which was something we actually buy and pull together, and then we leveraged everything else we could get our hands on, right, that the IT environment had, which was things like a proxy authenticating. We had libpcap just running to do our own packet captures in certain durations in time, right? And then eventually we got a real product called Solera at the time that Symantec owns now. But then we had McAfee and other endpoint security things that we'd leverage too. We did have a good team of people. That helps a lot. And we also had some preset flags and things we knew we wanted to look at, right, when they came across our path to pay extra attention to. And that's where I think the kind of high value target data, right, comes into play. Where do you focus in at if you have host data or you just have data out in the cloud or IoT certain data aspects? If you have network data, what's the most valuable? And for us, we really focused in, like I said, on web, DNS, and also really actually mail traffic too from SMTP. So timeliness, having the ability to query and get that data was really critical too. So whatever you are focused in on. And if you're going to use a dashboard, I'll put in quotes, right, like make it meaningful or useful for the person looking at it. It's just like storytelling. You need the audience to have what they need. And then I'll stress that a thing that helped us there, that you'll see a theme throughout this, and I completely agree with this Zscaler guy on the software-defined network kind of stuff, right? He was kind of saying you need to have identity management segmentation and also like layer 7 app segmentation. network segmentation is dead. It doesn't stop anything. As soon as someone gets in, they find those credentials, they move around just like anyone else. And so unless you start thinking about it at that layer 7 like approach, whether or not you're going to keep certain network controls and things, you have to have identity management segmentation. And in this case, we had actually, to control lateral movement, something we'd gotten IT guys to do was randomize the local admin passwords. So what you see a lot of places still sometimes is you'll image all the devices, right, with the same local admin password. So as soon as you get compromised, you move laterally really fast with that same admin password, especially in Windows environments, and that's a bad thing. And then inevitably you find somewhere where a domain admin was on that system or touched it or something using a domain admin credential, because that's how things work, right, for backup, or maybe you're doing some vulnerability scans, security people, right, using domain admin to go check everything. It lays around on Windows environments like, just candy waiting for the taking, right? So, and then once you have that, it's pretty much over. But in this case, we had pretty good segmentation that helped contain, right? Someone still got in, and someone's always going to get in, but it helps contain everything. Horse story 2, this one's not uber cool, but it was really persistent. And you can see up there the first thing. It was a multi-year, I'll call it APT, state-sponsored, whatever you want to use as a term, sophisticated group that was well-funded. A lot of indications that, that it's state-sponsored. And it was a long response and recovery effort, too. So the first phase, I'll call it, right, we don't know how long it was going on. We know it was months, probably maybe even a year, because by the time we found out about it, we didn't know where patient 0 was. We were tipped off about it, and so we started looking around. This is kind of post-mortem, these details, right? And we saw later, actually, from monitoring that particular group and other intelligence or information we were able to gather based on what we found, that they used phishing and waterhole attacks quite a bit, right? And they even had during the time we started monitoring, wound up using those same techniques on other systems later on during the overall, what I'll call life cycle of this investigation. Phase 2, really I'll say is once we were able to observe and we knew we had a problem, we had forensics devices now deployed, right, on the network that we could kind of look at traffic and starting to collect other things. We knew at this point where their access points into our network were, which were many places, but we were pre-positioned to watch them. And so after a cycle every 3 months, I'll call them the B team, would come in and do systems administration. They'd make sure the passwords that they'd stolen before still worked. They'd figure out what the new ones were. They'd check all of the implants to make sure they're working. They'd remote into the other hosts that were within the infrastructure, and we watched them. It's actually how we found a lot of other infected hosts ultimately, because while they were doing their checkups on their list of I've got these systems and I've got these accounts and I've got this going on, we found more stuff, right? More badness. And that's actually why we were watching. We wanted to know what all they knew and what they were doing, but also how are we going to fix this problem, right? This was a large organization, tons and tons of systems and users. So it's like, if you just kick them out, are you going to keep them from getting back in, right? It's easy to kick someone out, or when you think, I'm going to, reimage this machine, or I'm going to get rid of this malware, or disable this account, or reset the password. But if you haven't plugged the holes, or at least done something, they're going to get back in. So that was really fun. It was fun to watch them, use our own tools, sometimes install updates even for the servers and things so that people couldn't get in. And then phase 3, actually, I'll say, is that we observed the A team, I'll call them, come in. They used the same systems to come into the network, but then they deployed and pre-positioned new tools for enumeration, key logging, password stealing, and they had dedicated scripts and processes that run through things like PowerShell, SMB, right, where they tried to blend in. They'd go through RDP to other systems, and they were specifically looking for intellectual property, right? Searching for research and development, design specifications, source code, a lot of interesting things. Matter of fact, they had to pivot from a Windows environment into a Unix software distribution environment and go after source code repositories. So they wound up having to use some different tool sets than what had been positioned on the Windows servers that were kind of their access point. Because we were watching them and because time had passed, we were really able to not tip them off what was happening. I know one of the earlier cloud discussions was, right, you don't always want to do the eradication, and I agree with that. Immediately, we were able to keep them from getting the crown jewels, so to speak, while still continuing this observation and collecting data on them. Because we weren't ready yet to do our rebuild and recovery, right? We weren't ready to plug the holes, we knew it. So we didn't want to tip them off that we knew what was going on and we were watching. We were prepared to pull the trigger, though. So what happened here? How did all this come to be, right? So that's kind of the whole story. But initial was actually notification from the government. Thank you, Uncle Sam. It was not a lot of information, but enough to get started. Those were initial IOCs. And like I said, we had a custom network forensics platform on this case, too, that we deployed. And it allowed us to find a few more things, right? And then we kept pivoting from there after we had took forever to get like images collected, right? It was from organization to organization that was affiliated, things like that. It can be a really lengthy process to get those disk images, all the proxy logs, and then there's incomplete records, right? When it's been going on this long, so you just start to get hints, and then every once in a while you strike gold when you're in a large enterprise like this trying to hunt things down. And the more we got positioned to watch things, the more we would find, right? So when they came back in, they actually helped us the most on that first cycle that we saw after 3 months of going around and checking all the systems. Luckily, this expedited our deployment, so we could deliver more and more visibility. It also, we were able to convince, the people in charge that we should have the patience to watch, to gather this intelligence, and to prepare, right? So really the preparation was the identity management, hygiene and hardening, and that layer 7 type of compartmentalization and protecting the crown jewels. The type of accounts that they had access to were domain admin, enterprise admin accounts, right? In an Active Directory, you own the world then. So how do you prevent that from happening, being spread out? So we had to have a pretty complex plan. And I think you all know Active Directory or any IDAM solution is like the basis of everything in your environment, right? So if you mess with that, you can break a lot of things. So we prepared and launched like this massive design to kick them out, but also to keep them out. That's really kind of where these then kind of insights come from. We did in this case, for the security team, we'd picked something first to focus on and really push, which was having visibility and data. And at the time, again, that was a network forensics platform, but that's how it let us do more once we had that tipper, right, that we could go look at things. And we had pre-positioned at least the network tools. We had good analysts there too. We also got lucky, right? Someone told us something was going on potentially, so we went and took a look and were able to find more. And because there was something, we were able to do more. Again, we were prioritizing what we thought were our high-value kind of data sources, since we were kind of that moat design, having PCAP, layer 7, and the ability to kind of deploy custom signatures, whether it was Yara or related to Bro or Snort, really helped us out a lot. And the data that was useful, obviously, was PCAP, who has helped us a lot, actually, in this case. So we could map out additional infrastructure and then go pivot back and look and see if any of those callback domains or other malware samples are being used. And in a couple cases, that was true, so we found more things. And then good, I'll call it threat intelligence, but information sharing. That analyst-to-analyst network can't be underestimated, and even official channels proved useful here, although slower. And patience. This is probably the most patience I've seen of any organization, to have the wisdom to listen and then watch and gain and kind of progress over this and take a little bit of risk, but also control that risk at the same time for gain. It's hard. The first thing people want to do is erase, remove, eradicate, right, and be done. Reset the passwords. And IDAM, you've got to have identity management, right? If you don't have that shit figured out, it's going to be terrible. So concepts like Microsoft's Red Forest, if you go take a look at that, or I can talk to you about it later. It's a way to, and everyone winds up using Active Directory, but it winds up working with things like Okta, Azure AD, same concepts of how you create true boundaries within identity management. So the same idea of like network segmentation, right? How do you do that segmentation with your identity management, and who the people are, who the devices are? Again, what the Zscaler dude was talking about is a lot of sense, right? You really got to have that. Whether you're keeping your traditional network and all those things, or you go to his zero-defined software network, that's a key place that has to be segmented and controlled. And you got to have really good hygiene. So privilege account management, that kind of thing on there really matters. You can't have these super-duper accounts that allow you to have problems just sitting around, or you're going to have a lot of pain. Third war story. The apocalypse, I call it. It was the same kind of concept that, you have phishing emails, you get initial access. Again, it was those local admin rights and then domain admin rights that eventually led to the downfall and full coverage of this entire enterprise network. You're able to spread laterally really fast, and you become invisible, right? I mean, it's just RDP or SMB or any other number of allowed communication protocols and tools that everyone else is using, and you look like Joe or Bill or Susie or whoever. And so silently for weeks, even months, exfilled a large amount of data, like everything, I'll say. So emails, files, everything was taken. And then they set up their next phase, because that really wasn't their goal. Their goal was more of a FU, I'll call it, because it was, we're going to destroy everything we can, right? And you see more of these attacks happening all the time, more data, through either encryption or manipulation of master boot records or certain key boot files, right? Are just there to make things inoperable, to damage or lose data for organizations and individuals. And so that was the last stage. After collection, they blasted everything. With those kind of credentials too, it's pretty easy to do. So wiping tools and manipulation tools, everything, endpoints, servers, obliterated. Very, very not nice. What happened? Well, it became obvious. All of a sudden, people were like getting into their computer systems and are like, this isn't working. This isn't okay. And everything's down. Mass panic sets in masse. There were other indications, right, in hindsight when you do the investigation, because you can, although it's painful, spend a lot of time recovering these disks if they weren't fully encrypted, or files actually securely deleted, right? I mean, everyone knows here probably, right? The data's still there effectively. It just takes time to acquire it and reconstruct it, depending on how much damage was done to the file system or the file itself. So we were able to recover a lot of data over time, like months and months and months, to try to understand. But that took a lot of hindsight time. So there was an army of IT and security folks to create a new temporary network and comms capabilities, as well as to investigate and rebuild to a new operational network, right? So how do we get back to some new state that works? It's really, really, really hard to recover when you don't have domain controllers. They're just gone. Or your backup systems are just gone, right? And I don't mean like, hey, the tapes are there or this other storage mechanism, but when you don't have the encryption keys for that, because they were sitting on one server that wasn't backed up, the backup to the backup, right? All of a sudden, like encrypted like storage sitting around becomes pretty useless. Or even better, assume you have that and the ability to decrypt it, but then you don't have the indexes. When you're talking about manual tape and running through and rebuilding indexes, that takes a long time when you're trying to get things restored. It doesn't work so good. I mean, you're literally sitting there thinking about things spinning again, right, at like this speed I can count on my watch versus solid state drives. That's really painful. So there's some, thoughts there, right, about insights from Joshua at the end. And then it makes investigation and response really slow. Everyone wants to know why, what, are they going to get back, what's happening, but like I said, you've leveled, right? Someone set off a nuke and destroyed this place. It's really hard to get data to answer those questions. And it's competing with the time and resources that you want to get comms and other systems back up too. These organizations have to keep working. So insights, this one was not having forensic stuff pre-positioned, kind of caused some problems. Someone should have noticed at some point when terabytes of data were being exfilled out over their connection. That usually looks kind of bad. So that hurt a lot, right? And then I guess also I think an insight is that destructive attacks are really real now. You hear some in the news, but a lot don't get advertised, right? And where people are pretty harsh towards folks now if they have a reason to be. And it's a good idea to exercise what a complete, destructive attack looks like from a COOP disaster recovery scenario. Because if you lose those domain controllers, right, or those backup systems or whatever it is, that can be pretty impactful in terms of how things are working. Definitely have a backup to the backup, and in particular, we talk about high value data or things to focus in. It's the same thing with this on the IT side. Those indexes are really important. The encryption keys are really important. Certain things like that, right? That are just the crown jewels, the core of the foundation, right? The cornerstone. And DCs, having offline copies and frequently having those updated, and some kind of a backup that's easily accessible or usable is pretty critical typically too. And then honestly, again, I know I'm harping on it, but this idea that you're going to harden and segment at the identity management level and compartmentalization of that matters so much. And also focus where you can have the highest impact, return, and control. This neat little graphic up here, all the other ones have been movie references, but this one has some additional deeper meaning. That's the kill chain there, if you don't recognize it. Lockheed Martin owns that, and a lot of people talk about it. And then the sub-breakdown, though, is actually more of a MITRE thing, the attack methodology. There's actually a bunch of information, get that off of MITRE.org site. It's really cool stuff. Comes from a lot of guys working on red teams or penetration testing or doing offensive computing, building out enumeration and trying to specify what happens in attacks when you move lateral. And those are the areas we focus in as a defender. they just had a MITRE AttackCon conference that they streamed that you might be able to pull down too. It's a good place to go look. But when you talk about in those areas of focus, it's a lot more realistic of where you have influence. Unless you're a super secret squirrel agency, or maybe like a company with like, you don't give a rat's about, attack back or doing something, you're not going to do much in the recon phase or weaponize or exploit phase where you're going to deliver an impact. And even if, like, let's say you are investing there for threat intelligence or whatever you want to call it, or information to know what's going on, that can be helpful, but someone's going to get in or do something at some point. And so once they do get in, where do you have control? Where can you invest to minimize what happens? I used to talk to like an admiral in the Navy about it, like, well, ships used to be made out of wood. You put a hole in it, the whole thing sinks. And now you guys don't build your ships out of wood, right? You compartmentalize, you have segmentation in it. So that way if something breaches, you seal it off so that area floods, but then you can pump, recover, save lives, whatever, right, on the rest of the boat. They've designed these things to be built that way so that they don't just lose everything at once. Right now, usually when you get compromised, you lose everything at once with domain admin, right? Or enterprise admin or local admin being the same everywhere, whatever that is. But again, attack methodology is a really cool way to look at things and think through, and they're constantly refining it. And that's where all of these tools, or if you go to just Zscaler and have no tools, I guess, right? As the guy was talking about, you would have the most impact to control something happening. I think I've got a little bit more time because I don't know how late we ran over, but the last war story was kind of tool dump fun. So I don't know if you've ever been somewhere and a vulnerability comes out in the public and then people who are really important come running, what's going on? Do we have a problem or are we going to be hurt? Are we vulnerable or are we under attack? Or they hear maybe about exploits or tools being dumped from super secret squirrel places or other types of hackers, right? And it's in the news. It's a really hot thing. That happens to us all the time and our teams and people. So, some important people wanted to know, what was going on. Do we have that? Do we see it? And in this particular situation, the data set is huge, exceptionally large. We're talking all of the internet traffic in and out for thousands of large organizations. And so this is, kind of defined if you think of it like net flow, back and forth, billions of flows a day. But no visibility into endpoints or beyond that. So you just have all this internet data going back and forth between organizations to look for badness and say something. It's pretty hard to do. It's that needle and needles thing someone was making fun of. It really gets difficult, right? It's a big data problem. So how do you build an analytic for net flow? Or we have snort signature capability to apply there too, to find. In this case, it's just kind of one-on-one signature building still, but it's a good process to follow. Build that profile, pull in the lab. This thing's been dumped. You can have a copy of it. Build kind of your test harness, right, to run it, automate it, execute it, collect lots of samples and data and enumerations as much as you can. You got to really stimulate the environment, not to be made fun of. But yeah, you got to get things working. And then once you have that interaction and data, you can start to do something with it, right? And in this case, we were having a hard time because most of it was encrypted, so it has high entropy, and that looks really hard to detect, or for devices to figure out things on it. So our analyst in this case actually kind of started working with some different visualization methods to profile the data, which wound up being really successful. And he actually kind of extended and built a tool to help with large packet and other types of data analysis to visualize and look kind of called the water flow method. And I'm talking a little bit past my scope because I wasn't the analyst. But that's what led to seeing basically a commonality, right, outside of all the entropy that was that's interesting. Let me zoom in on that. And there's a repeatable pattern that we can detect and do something with. So this is kind of again, hard to tell probably up there. But that banding that's circled was an indication of repeating, right, commonality, whereas the rest was pretty much randomness. And so that repeating pattern that we visualized, we could go then dig in deeper and see what that really meant and looked like. And it really turned out to be part of the handshake of the protocol because it was using a custom protocol for the tool that was being profiled with it. And we could then build a signature around that. Now, it took more tuning and fine-tuning, especially with a massive data set, because all of a sudden you find within massive data sets other things that look kind of similar to this weird protocol that was being used because it was a custom written protocol. But still, I guess millions of people in the world, right? There's several false positives, so it got tweaked a bit more. But it worked. And also it kind of really showed that visualization of really weird data that looks like nothing to humans, or you can't find normal things because it's custom. There's still stuff out there, right? When you start to visualize and do clustering and things like that or look for groupings, it stands out like a sore thumb, and then you can go investigate further. So that was pretty cool. The ability to, have someone that can do coding and help extend tools is really helpful, I would say. It was probably obvious to this crew, but you'll find a lot of places that there's no one enabled to do that, right? There isn't an environment to do it. They may not have the skills, or they have the skills but not the environment and the leeway to do it. It's really important to be able to extend tools, glue them together, do custom analysis, things of that nature. And then enabling that environment is really critical too. And I think that is another thing to credit to this, that enablement was there and the ability to work on that and then apply it in the production environment too, right? And test it further and execute on and refine. So that's kind of the end of my war stories. Any questions? I can't see well with the spotlight, so if I'm not seeing you might have to wave at me like this or something. I'm going to go with no. That's a no. There's no questions. Everyone go drink, eat dinner. Thank you for coming to... Thanks, man.
Thank you, sir. Oh, don't forget your drink.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Listen, it's not easy to wrap up the show the last talk, so I appreciate you talking. I appreciate everyone hanging out here. We are going to set up now for Hacker Jeopardy. So I'm going to actually, before we do that, I'm going to plug in and while we're setting up. Did everyone just leave me? Come on, John. John, get some, come down here.
Yeah.
Help me out.
Come on up front.
Everyone. Oh, no, everyone's playing. No, everyone's playing.
Yeah, come up